So the tariff war has reached unprecedented levels. We know Trump has imposed a brutal tariff regime on the entire world. Strap yourselves in, guys. A base level of 10% on every country around the globe. Especially if you're manufacturing advanced goods like chips and EVs. Trump is out to punish your exports. Remember the plan. Everything has to be made in the United States. But his punishments on China has reached new epic levels. It dwarfs anything that we have imagined. It underscores how big of a threat the Chinese economy is to Washington. Now, Trump has imposed a reciprocal tariff rate of 34% on exports coming from China. This is the biggest tariff rate on an economy the size of China. In absolute terms, this could destroy hundreds of billions in bilateral trade. Here's the crazy part. This isn't escalating the additional tariff from 20% to 34%. No, this new tax is on top of the existing sanctions, which means to import Chinese goods into the United States, imports will face a 54% levy. Chinese cars will forever be banned from the US. No importer will bring in an EV from BYD and face a 154% tariff in total. It's simply insane. The tariff rate stacking is something that Scott Bessent has also confirmed. The US is going all out to contain China's industrial economy. There's no other way to interpret this.
Reciprocal tariff. China has this 34% tariff. There were already 20% tariffs in place on China. So is that 34% on top of that, meaning it's a 54% reciprocal tariff on China?
I believe it is.
So is this the end of the Chinese economy? Will Beijing collapse tomorrow? And this is where we need to separate out fact and fiction. Realize that the China of today is very different from the China of 2005. They have diversified a lot of business away from the United States. The first trade war in 2018 was a warning. The sanctions on Russia was another wake-up call. The US doesn't need to sanction China using the dollar or threaten banking sectors like Janet Yellen. Trump just needs to impose tariffs and block China away from their consumer market. But things have changed. Since 2018, the US and China have already been trading less. In 6 years, total trade between the US and China has fallen by at least 3 to 5%. However, observe who Beijing is trading more with. Bilateral trade with Russia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, and the UAE are the fastest growing relations. These are countries that are in BRICS or they are partners of the trading bloc. So no, China is far from helpless and they will not collapse tomorrow. It's a Washington fantasy, but like it or not, that won't come true. And look at things from another perspective. By imposing a big tariff war on the world, Trump has crippled the US economy as a valuable export destination. His motive is to reshore production and not to entertain exporters. The king of the world has raised a tariff barrier so high that many countries will face an export collapse. According to Fitch, the new effective tariff rate has increased from 2.5% last year to at least 22%. That's a 10 times jump that is the highest since 1910, a 100-year record. It's also impossible for all foreign companies to eat the tariff. I'm sure some might, but many exporters' margins are razor thin, so they will have to pass down the tariff to US consumers. But do US people, they have the money? Well, they don't. Let's not forget that US government spending is also coming down. If you're a manufacturing economy, the future of exports is not the United States. Trump has alienated the entire of Asia. Many countries have been hit with big tariffs. Japan 24%, Korea 26%, India 27%, and Vietnam an incredible whopping 46%. The only way to sell your products in the US is to uproot your factories and move all the way to America. That's the grand plan. But once you're there, you lose a lot of control. And the biggest threat then is the specter of US national security. Just look at what's being done to successful companies like TikTok. The US wants to take it away. Now, Trump did a very silly move, especially if he's trying to make a pivot from Europe all the way to Asia. I live in Asia, guys, and I can tell you no one here is excited, no one is thrilled about Trump's tariff war. This is going to cause massive layoffs and livelihoods for many people are going to collapse. The US has fired the bazooka this time. We also have Beijing giving an ultimatum to Trump. Roll back your tariffs or we will take countermeasures. And the big question is, how will China retaliate? Now, the easiest assumption is China cancelling more American imports and blocking critical mineral exports to US companies. Now, make no mistake, those will hurt and do more damage to Trump's economy, but been there and done that. And China really thinks long term. They are playing chess while Trump is playing snakes and ladders. The level of strategy in Washington is really underwhelming. And if we can understand it, you best believe that policymakers sitting in Beijing, sitting in China, they are not blind to it. The winning move by China is simple. It's not to retaliate by imposing counter tariffs. They should drop their own trade barriers to the world and unleash a wave of stimulus. Now, we mentioned before how China can issue bonds and inject liquidity into their banks, but Beijing can do even more. China can reduce the reserve requirement ratios for their commercial banks. This triple R card will allow the banks to start lending out even more money to both producers and consumers. For over 3 years since Biden started the chip war, China has been conserving their fiscal ammunition. They haven't fired their stimulus bazooka yet, and that's why the reserve requirements have hardly moved. Their big banks are still near 10%, and that isn't low at all. In the US, big banks like JP Morgan and Bank of America, they have reserve requirements of 0% or near zero. So China has the fiscal room. This is perhaps the most powerful tool the PBOC has to stimulate both supply and demand in China's economy. And when China's domestic demand starts to rise, who do you think exporters will move to? It will be this meme of Trump telling the world to pay the tariffs and everyone else just walks away. They will be taking their business to China. This is not the art of the deal. Trump basically fired the entire US economy in one single afternoon. And here's how big the collapse can get for the US economy. US dependence on imports is still around historic highs. US imports are around 11% of the entire US GDP. Trump wants to raise $700 billion through tariffs, but either scenario is a disaster, and let's explain why very simply here. If Trump gets every dollar, which is not plausible, the $700 billion will be largely coming out of hard-working Americans' paychecks. Consumers will be subsidizing this. But if this fails and people stop buying, this will be an import collapse. This means up to $3 trillion of goods will have to be replaced by more expensive domestic options. Global exporters see this situation play out and they inherently know it's a disaster. Either way, US consumers will be impoverished by US trade policy. But here's the crux of the matter. The recent trade actions have also confirmed to everyone that the US doesn't care about friendshoring. The plan was never to rely on your allies to provide you with critical products. Now, since Yellen came up with that term in 2023 or 2024, we have told everyone here the plan is reshoring back to the US. Friendshoring was just a red herring, and now the White House has confirmed everything.
What's happened to the world is the global governments have backed taking our factories away from us. I mean, there's nothing about Taiwan that they should be making semiconductors. There's nothing about Korea. They should be making all of the appliances and the electronics of the world. What's happened is they had a policy of their governments to let's back our companies and let's take this business from America while America's not paying attention. So our factories went overseas. But what you're going to see is the most modern factories of the world come back here.
Now the message is loud and clear. Every country in the world, even US allies like Japan, now realize that they were being duped and the only way forward will be BRICS. This is the trading bloc that has been growing like gangbusters. Not only do you have the founding members like China, there are new members including Indonesia, which is a fast-growing economy. This year alone, the BRICS will account for 27% of global GDP. And if you throw in partner countries, it's almost 30%. That's more than the US economy. And consider the trajectory as well. If costs in the United States continues to go up, how much exports can US consumers buy? Really, not a lot. This won't be the export destination of tomorrow. Emerging markets, especially those in BRICS, will be the future. Look, let's be clear about this. The consequences for the US economy is going to be disastrous. If countries choose to retain their manufacturing and industries, Trump might not get the investments he wants. In fact, China just told their companies not to invest in the United States, which means they will invest elsewhere, most likely in BRICS or countries in their Belt and Road program, which will be very ironic to the US. We could see even more countries rush to join BRICS or join the BRI in an act of defiance. Another big concern is the fate of the US dollar. For over 40 years, this has been the reserve currency of the world. In times of crisis, countries buy the USD as a safe haven asset, and a lot of people, investors, and countries, they all rush to US bonds. But if Trump closes off the US consumer market and threatens deindustrialization to everyone, countries could simply walk away from US assets. Now, the US dollar fell the hardest yesterday, losing nearly 2% against other currencies. This is the biggest drop since November 2022 and one of the worst in 10 years. Now, does a weaker dollar help US exports? Sure, it does, but that's contingent on the US getting foreign investments to build factories to make stuff. What if countries follow China and stop the money flowing into the United States? This will cause the US dollar to collapse further without any net benefit to the economy. And in that scenario, US consumers can buy less and still suffer massive job losses from the tariff war. Now, Trump's cabinet still doesn't understand how higher tariffs affect US consumers. He still believes it's like a magic wand where you can wish away all your problems and just invent your own brand of economics.
So if employment, in fact, leaps, and we'll come back to that, it may not help much if prices themselves are also going up. So let's just level with people. In the short term, every economist seems to think the prices will go up. Should people be prepared for that, and for how long?
Well, I think you have to sort of understand how things work. When tariffs come into place, foreign goods may become a little more expensive, but domestic goods do not. So if you're looking at Poland Springs water versus, something, let's say, Fiji water, the Poland Springs is not going to be more expensive. So for the first time in your lives, you're going to actually think about the Americans who make the products, the Americans who produce these products and work in these factories. It's time for us to take care of them.
Now, these are the high IQ geniuses in the White House. Foreign goods become more expensive, but domestic goods do not. That's not true. Maybe in Lutnick's multiverse, but not in our current reality. So it's really important to understand the end effects of the tariff war. It has more or less severed US-China trade forever. Things will never be the same after this. It has invited major retaliation from the world. Even Europe wants to hit back, which is really unprecedented. But more importantly, Trump has put US consumers in a very untenable position. If exporters walk away and foreign companies refuse to invest in the US, we could have a disaster scenario where the dollar collapses further and unemployment flies up in the US. And that could really be on the cards. The big winner here will be China and BRICS. But let me know what you think. Did Trump really think it through carefully, or is it already too late? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.